I recently lost one of my closest friends. Her name was Whitney Oliver. She passed away in her sleep at age 36 on October 29th, 2022. She was pregnant with her first child, Felix, who passed away as well. Whitney's death is sudden and shocking and completely heartbreaking. She was excited to be a mom, and everyone was so excited for her. She was having a rough pregnancy, but she'd always been very perseverant, and no one could imagine losing her. I turned 35 in 2022, and 10 years earlier, when I turned 25, Whitney made me a birthday cake, which I think speaks to the kind of person she was and the quality of our friendship. As devastated as I am to lose a true friend like Whitney in this way, I cannot fathom what Whitney's husband Alex, who I also love very much, and all the wonderful people in Whitney's family are currently experiencing. Whitney also helped developmentally disabled artists for an organization called Project Onward, and I know everyone there is still hurting a lot from her loss as well. I'm going to talk about Project Onward more later on in this video, but I want to encourage you to visit Project Onward's website, buy their art, donate, and if you're in Chicago, visit the gallery and see the amazing art that's being made there.
Project Onward is a nonprofit studio and gallery for artists, adult artists with developmental disabilities and mental illness. So it really is broad. It's all levels of neurodiversity. And what we do is it kind of works like a artist in residency program. So we take an artist on and we provide them with all of their materials to facilitate their artistic practice. And we give them a space to show their work in our gallery. And we really try to help them develop their practice and sell their work, and to get a client base of collectors and get them out there, get their artwork out there.
I just wanted to talk about Whitney for a while because I'm thinking about her and I want people to know why she was important beyond our friendship, why she'll be so sorely missed, and why this world is better for having had her in it. When I first met Whitney, she was my roommate Ben's weed dealer. We all went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I didn't really know Whit during school. I didn't know her long post-graduation before she had to go back to her hometown of Evansville, Indiana, to work at a liquor store until she could get back to the city. I remember at her going away party, I was introduced to the Whitney chant. Whitney is an incredibly chantable name. There are two strong syllables in it. Whitney, 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 Whitney. But Whitney was determined, and eventually she made her way back to Chicago. The three of us, her, Ben, and I, along with her beloved Cocker Spaniel Russell, wound up living together in the biggest, cheapest apartment in all of Logan Square, in a building full of other weirdos, some of whom we would wind up forming lifelong bonds with. Whitney taught me to roll spliffs in that apartment, and we'd smoke and watch her old VHS collection. And at the time, your boy had some blind spots. I'd somehow never seen Point Break, Die Hard, Moonstruck, or Spice World until I met Whitney, but she remedied all of that. She even introduced me to other friends I don't know where I'd be without, including her, at the time, future husband, Alex. Whitney met Alex when they worked together at a Mariano's grocery store. I still remember Whitney studying wine to work their liquor department at the time. Alcohol wasn't her dream job. I also remember her really wanting to work at this bead place and that not working out and her being really bummed, but booze was gradually turning itself into a career for her. Whitney came back to Evansville for their annual fall festival, which she adored, but on the way back to Chicago, she got in this horrific car accident. She broke several limbs and had to be airlifted from the highway while EMTs took care of Russell. When she was laid up in the hospital, Alex came to visit her from all the way in Chicago, and that's how they truly fell in love. They got a new place together in that very same building. Whit did this sick purple and lavender two-tone paint job on the walls with this big diagonal line in the middle. She really made it their home. Alex wasn't an animal guy at first, but he fell in love with Russell just like he fell in love with Whit. Whitney made art for Alex's band, and we'd all gather for Walking Dead and Breaking Bad on Sundays. This was back when people cared about AMC, mind you. Whitney had type 1 diabetes, and I remember when The Walking Dead introduced Tina, who was also diabetic. Whitney was so amped. She'd always wondered how someone like her might survive in a zombie apocalypse, just like everybody does. But Tina got ate later in that very same episode. And Whitney was really disappointed. I always remembered that. Talking to Whitney about stuff like that helped remind me that ableism is a real issue in media representation. Anyway, if I recall correctly, it was around this time that Whitney and Alex discovered their shared love of Star Trek. I always thought it was cool that Whitney and Alex got into Star Trek together. They weren't initially fans independently, it was something they found as a couple. Alex started the show on a whim, and Whit joined not long after. And before you know it, they were full-blown convention-attending Trekkies. I always joked during those years that living in that building was like living in a sitcom. A diverse group of offbeat 20-somethings and an adorable Cocker Spaniel in an apartment that seems much too large for them to be able to afford. We even had the shady, scheming landlord character. We were getting into shenanigans and learning lessons about life and love and whatnot. Even when it sucked, we had each other, and thankfully we still have each other because not having Whitney sucks more than anything I could possibly imagine. Eventually, Whitney, Alex, and Russell moved up and out of that building. They got better jobs and a better apartment. Whitney became a beer rep for an alcohol distributor, and conversely, Alex was getting sober. With Whit's help and support, he was quitting alcohol and really just starting to find himself overall as a person. Rough times were ahead, fun times were ahead. She got comped at all these restaurants and took her friends out on the old style double-decker bus. That's where I got this t-shirt. But ultimately, she just knew it wasn't for her, so she quit. She studied art therapy, and she worked at this pizza place that she openly despised. I guess they did this thing where they let kids play with raw pizza dough. It did sound gross. But eventually, thankfully, Whitney found her way to Project Onward, the aforementioned nonprofit that specializes in helping artists with developmental disabilities. Whitney made her home at Project Onward as well, quickly becoming an instrumental part of their organization, eventually becoming their studio manager. She was exactly where she belonged, somewhere she could help people through art, somewhere people were expressing themselves, and somewhere she could champion people who needed it. Whitney and Alex got married in 2019 on an unimaginably beautiful day. I was honored to have them choose me as their officiate. They said they chose me because I was their best mutual friend, and that made me really happy. I was really honored that they asked me. They had me talk about an episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, like it was scripture, and it was perfect, the line they wanted highlighted. It was,
"Seize the time, Maribor. Live now. Make now always the most precious time. Now will never come again."
those words felt appropriate at the time, but now they feel prophetic. So many people from Whitney and Alex's lives, all in one place, living in the moment, celebrating their love, and appreciating what we had while we had it. I made sure a Whitney chant happened later that night, and I'm so glad that I did. Ben and I even got to deliver a surprise pizza to Whit and Alex in the middle of the night at a hotel. We seized the shit out of that time. Russell was there in his finest wedding attire, but sadly, Whitney and Alex had to put Russell down not long after that. Whitney was devastated. That dog was her pride and joy. But she managed to carry on. She got a Cocker Spaniel named Magic, and she loved that dog with all of her heart. I'm so glad that Alex still has Magic. And even though I'm not a particularly religious or, frankly, even spiritual person, now that Whitney isn't with us anymore, it's hard to imagine her anywhere but wherever Russell went. Project Onward is going to be Whitney's legacy now, and I think that's absolutely extraordinary. I think what Whitney was able to accomplish in what turned out to be the final years of her life is more impressive than what most people ever accomplish. And she didn't even get half the time she should have. Whitney was funny and compassionate. She was a good cook. She was a good listener. She was open-minded, but she stood on her words. I can't believe the world has to go on without Whitney. It desperately needed her. When someone dies, there's often a lot of talk about things happening for a reason and being part of a grand, mysterious plan, but fuck all of that. Whitney would have been an amazing mom. She would have been an amazing elder. Whitney is exactly the kind of person you want to help inspire a new generation, and the idea that that isn't going to happen is deflating. Even as her family and friends do our best to make her proud and honor her memory, we do so understanding that she was completely irreplaceable. Personally, I'm pretty much shattered. It's been a rough couple years. I got a divorce, I had to move back to my hometown, and then I lost my job. When things were bad for me, Whitney was there. She was checking in, she was making sure I was okay, like she always did. Whitney loved her friends fiercely, and she wanted everybody to be their truest selves. And she and I both understood that the marriage and the job, they were dead ends, and I'd ultimately be better off. There is no silver lining to losing Whitney. It's just a bad time for everybody that knew her. You don't get too many people in this life who really know who the fuck you are. Every friendship has its own special frequency, and it's really hard to come to terms with the fact that although I'm lucky to have so many people in my life who are supportive and loving, I'm never going to have a friend quite like Whitney again. Whitney's husband, Alex, is devastated in a way that I hope I never truly understand. His future is heading in a completely different direction than anything he'd ever anticipated, and I care about him a lot, and I wish there was more that I could do to make sure he's going to be okay. He's shown an incredible amount of strength and resolve through what can only be described as a waking nightmare, and he's punctuated many of his statements on Whitney's passing with the question, what would Whitney want? And I think it's perfect, not just because of the 4W initial, but because Whitney had a very strong moral compass and an open mind, a lack of self-importance and pretentiousness. And her family, her friends, her co-workers, the artists that she worked with, we all wanted her perspective. We all wanted her opinion. We all wanted her approval. And I don't see why that should stop just because she's gone. Whitney had 3 incredibly well-attended memorials. One in her hometown of Evansville, Indiana, one at Project Onward in Chicago, and another informal gathering in Chicago at Sidekicks, her favorite karaoke bar. Every one of these gatherings was an opportunity to grieve and connect with others who loved Whitney, as well as an opportunity to get to know Whitney a little better even after her passing. It may seem like I'm deifying my friend because her passing was so sudden and tragic, and I really don't care. Some of the worst people you could possibly imagine have been deified after their death. Whitney was actually putting in the work, helping people. At first I wondered how she did it, how she managed to connect with all these people and even more spread out across the country, but those memorials helped me put things into perspective somewhat. Whitney had a mom and a dad and 3 brothers who loved her to pieces. She found women who called her sister everywhere she went. I think the strong ties she had with her family had a really positive effect on her friendships, and she found family everywhere she went. I've known few people so universally beloved. And I know I've mentioned that she helped artists, but she was an amazing artist in her own right. Her hometown memorial had this beautiful display of her artwork over the years. She had 2 successful careers and a beautiful marriage, and yeah, I just didn't know how she did it for a second there. But hearing her friends and family and the artists at Project Onward talking about Whitney made me realize that I'd really only been looking at half the picture. We all needed Whitney, there's no denying that, but she needed us as well. We don't have to juggle our relationships with our friends and our family. We get to keep each other afloat, in turn keeping ourselves afloat. I'll be asking myself to consider what would Whitney want for the rest of my days, as will many others. And one thing I know she'd want is for Project Onward to carry on, and the best way to make that happen is once again to donate to projectonward.org, to buy art from the artists there, and if you live in Chicago, please attend their art shows. They're incredible. It's impossible to regret going.
It's a source of self-esteem for a lot of our artists. They get validation from making a piece of work that's beautiful, and even more validation when it sells and they get that paycheck. So it's a source of self-esteem, it's a source of income, and for many of our artists, it's a source of social support.
Whether or not you knew my friend, I hope this story was inspirational. I hope it makes you think about what to do with the time you have. I'm not sure what kind of reach I have, but I hope there's a person out there who sees this, a person who loves art, but maybe not the art world, a person who loves animals and people in equal measure, a person who changes their hair color like the changing of the seasons, a person who wants to help people but maybe isn't sure how yet. And that person can see themselves in Whitney and maybe take a few pointers on how to proceed. I hope that Whitney can serve as a guiding light for years to come. I hope that someone loves you, and I hope that someone believes in you, and I hope that you love them back and you let them know it. Thanks for everything, Whit. We miss you.